But my official stance is that CGM can bring awareness to the health habits that are contributing to chronic disease, the increasing prevalence of chronic disease, and the increasing prevalence of symptoms that are leading up to chronic disease, that are stripping away at the fiber of what makes us human. Hey, you guys, thank you so much for tuning into the Culture of Health podcast. My name is Austin, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about why I believe non-diabetics should wear continuous glucose monitors and why everyone should be okay with it. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar or not, but there is an ongoing discussion, borderline debate, on who should have access to continuous glucose monitors. And if you're not familiar with what that is, I'm going to tell you in just a second. But first, let me tell you guys, again, my name is Austin. I am a human with an opinion. First and foremost, I'm a father. I have 4 children. I've been married for 10 years now. And I have been in pursuit of optimal health for a long time. And over the past 2 years, I've taken a leap when it comes to how I feel on a daily basis. And a lot of that is because of my experience with a continuous glucose monitor, specifically with levels, which I'll talk about shortly. But for those of you guys who are either type 1 diabetic or type 2 diabetic, I want to tell you something. I completely understand the frustration that you might have when you see somebody like me wearing a continuous glucose monitor. So I'm going to get into that in a second too. But for those of you guys who don't know what a continuous glucose monitor is, from this point forward, I'm going to try to refer to it as a CGM just to keep it short. But basically, it's a device that continuously monitors your glucose. This is a life-saving device specifically for diabetics because they have to inject insulin in order to keep their blood sugar levels under control. And in order to know how much insulin to inject, when to inject insulin, or to know when their blood sugar is approaching dangerous levels, whether too high or too low, a continuous glucose monitor tells them that. And so prior to this development, the most popular method was finger pricking. You would have to prick your finger, drop the blood onto a stick, put it into a glucometer or a glucose reader, a blood glucose reader, and then it will tell you what your blood sugar levels are. And I've been to the doctor and had to prick my finger. I personally couldn't imagine doing that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. And so the CGM was such a groundbreaking development for that population. And now there's debate on who should have access to this because there are supply chain issues, or there have been supply chain issues, which we'll get into. And there's also just a cultural, sociological, misunderstanding about who should be using this. So as someone who's not diabetic and benefited from using a CGM, let me tell you guys why I did. So I have always been very passionate about technology. And I've also been very recently, over the past 5 years or so, 5 to 7 years, I've become very passionate about health. And so a CGM is basically technology and health having a baby. And they gave birth to this continuous glucose monitor. So it piqued my interest when I first learned about it due to levels. And after trying it, I made the most radical changes to my lifestyle. And as someone who has been pursuing good health for a long time, my wife has been talking to me about my sugar intake. My mom has been talking to me about my sugar intake. And nothing really resonated with me until I started monitoring my glucose and seeing how much my blood sugar was fluctuating every day, all day. Now, it's not just the fluctuations that get you to make those changes. It's also having a fundamental understanding of what happens when your blood sugar is unstable. Consistent spikes throughout the day leads to your insulin being elevated throughout the day as well, which also leads to elevated A1C if your pancreas is not efficiently bringing your blood glucose levels back down into normal range. So for me, the education, along with the experience that levels provided, it led to the most radical change in my life. And it didn't just change the way I eat. It changed the way I slept. It changed the way I processed stress, changes the way just the way I exercise and how I live in general. And so a lot of my argument today for non-diabetics using this device is rooted in my experience and the experience of people close to me who have completely changed their lives because of a continuous glucose monitor. Now, that being said, who's currently using a continuous glucose monitor? It is type 1 diabetics and type 2 diabetics. Those are the primary people that are taking advantage of this technology, and for good reason, because they need it. But there's an emerging population using continuous glucose monitors, and that's biohackers and fitness influencers. And so imagine someone who's type 1 diabetic, when you're born without, some of them weren't born without the ability to regulate their own blood sugar levels. Maybe it just happened out of nowhere in their teens, but nevertheless, it's completely out of their control. And then they log on to this Instagram app, and you see somebody like me who is in good shape and has a working pancreas wearing a device that you use to survive. You can understand the frustration there. And I get it, because if the shoe was on the other foot, I might be frustrated too. But I think there's room for your frustration as a diabetic and for me to also benefit from this technology to change my life as well. So why are we seeing tension between users of this life-saving device? Again, diabetics feel like fitness influencers are using this device frivolously. It's like, hey, this is some bull. I need this to survive. And you're out here skinny with muscles or whatever the case is, just like, complaining about a banana that's spiking your blood sugar. And it's like, duh, you eat a banana, your blood sugar goes up, and then your working pancreas brings your blood sugar levels back down, while I had to inject insulin to bring my glucose levels back down. So that's some of the sentiment that's there when it comes to non-diabetics using continuous glucose monitors. But perhaps more importantly and more understandable is that diabetics are concerned with access for those who really need it. If you take a flood of people that are accessing this device when there have already been shortages, then it makes it a little bit more difficult for people to have access to it when they need it. And that's legitimate. That's real. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But those things being said, and taking all of that into consideration, I think that we should and will begin looking at continuous glucose monitors as a device used for disease prevention instead of disease management. Because while disease management says you shouldn't use a CGM unless you have diabetes, and again, I get it, right? The reason that we look at CGM as disease management devices are, number one, because that's how continuous glucose monitors started. That's the problem that they were created to solve. And as humans, it's really hard for us to imagine things being different. When the Wright brothers were welding together chunks of metal to fly in the air, or however they were putting the pieces of metal together, there were onlookers saying, "You're crazy." They're probably calling them more vulgar names than crazy, but how are you going to put hundreds of pounds of metal through the sky, thousands of pounds of metal through the sky to transport people? You're stupid. That's not going to work, right? It's hard to imagine things being different. Let's use more relevant examples, like cell phones. Again, you guys know I'm a technology guy. I used to work at Best Buy, and I sold cell phones, and I was present for the transition between phones with keyboards and phones without them, the transition from BlackBerry to iPhone. And there were constantly people coming in saying, "I will never get rid of my BlackBerry because I need buttons. Phones are supposed to have buttons." That's how they felt, because that's how they always saw phones, until touch screen phones came along and more people started using them. And as more people started using them, it became normal. AirPods. You guys remember when people first started wearing AirPods? I remember looking at people like, I would never wear an AirPod, and I still don't have a pair. But it looked silly. You got this little white stick coming down from your ear. it looked crazy because that's not what we were used to when it came to Bluetooth devices. But look around now. It is hard to go out in public without seeing someone with an AirPod hanging out of one of their ears. Because once it becomes popular and once people start using the device and people begin to see the benefit from it, then it becomes adopted at a wider level. It becomes more acceptable. So that being said, I'm going to ask you guys to do me a favor. I want you guys to forget everything you know just for a second about the current use of continuous glucose monitors. Let's forget that they were created to manage diabetes. And let's talk about CGM for disease prevention. Because while disease management, again, says CGM should be used to manage diabetes, disease prevention says CGM should be used to prevent diabetes and other conditions that are associated with poor glucose control. That "and" is really important because the continuous glucose monitor was created to, again, manage diabetes. But now we're finding that your glucose levels, your glucose trends throughout the day is a really good indicator of your risk for other chronic diseases. I'm going to talk to you guys about that in a second. Let's hone in on diabetes. I'm going to give you guys a stat for some additional context. 90 to 95% of all diabetics are type 2, which in most cases is preventable. This is good news, right? Because when you look at continuous glucose monitors and people who need them, me personally, I think of type 1 diabetics. That's who I have the most sympathy for. Not that I don't have sympathy for type 2 diabetics, because I do. But for type 1, it's like this was completely out of your control. And yes, you need this device to save your life. I 100% get that. But that's 5 to 10% of all diabetics. And I think this is important to highlight because it suggests that the prevalence of disease is largely in our control. We can do something about this. So maybe by now you have an opinion about whether or not continuous glucose monitors should or shouldn't be used in the non-diabetic population. And I just got to tell you, I respect your opinion, whatever your opinion is. Ultimately, I want everybody to have access to good health the same way that I have access to it. And wearing a continuous glucose monitor was one of the ways that I leveled up my game when it comes to the habits that I use to improve my health. And I'm not the only one who's not diabetic, benefit from using a continuous glucose monitor. And that's why I'm so grateful that Levels is doing what they're doing to expand the access to this device to people like me. Levels, if you haven't heard of them, is a software company that uses continuous glucose monitoring to show people how food is affecting their health. And when I first started monitoring my glucose, my blood sugar was all over the place. It was up and down, maybe 4 or 5 times a day. And once I got hold of habits that helped me maintain stable blood sugar, I noticed that I would have more energy throughout the day. I would have a lot more mental clarity, kind of like I do right now, because this ad is actually off the top of the dome. And I just felt better overall. And I'm not saying that because of stable blood sugar, I felt better. Yes, but it's because of the habits that I implemented that led to stable blood sugar, that created a cascade effect that led to me feeling like my best self. And that's why I'm such a huge fan of Levels, especially because I used to be pre-diabetic. In college, I was eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches, candy, drinking soda. And when you're existing in an environment where it's easy to make those decisions, like in college, then it's very easy for your health to slip. And unfortunately, not a lot of people recover from making those decisions over a long period of time. Thankfully, after my 4 years of college where I was indulging in several unhealthy habits, I became more responsible and I started treating my body well. And then once I found Levels, it was a game changer when it comes to me implementing new habits to take my health to the next level. And I know that a lot of you guys could probably use some similar benefits that I experienced from monitoring my glucose. And because of that, I'm leaving a link in the show notes of this podcast for you to experience Levels for yourself. Now, when you use this link, you gain 2 additional months on top of your annual membership. It's an exclusive link I have with Levels, thanks to them being a partner of this podcast. And if you're interested in taking advantage of this technology to improve your health, I highly recommend you do so through that link. And I highly recommend you keep me posted on your experience because I love hearing all about how Levels is helping people just like you improve your health. Hey, you guys, are you on a hunt for a product or any products that you can begin implementing on your daily routine that makes it easier for you to maintain good gut health? I hope you are, because that's something that we should all be looking for. And if we're not getting it in our diet, then it's something that we should be supplementing, period. What I'm talking about is fiber. Fiber is one of the most essential nutrients that many of us are missing. In fact, it's estimated that most Americans are getting about 14 grams of fiber on a daily basis when we should be getting somewhere around 30 to 35. So there's a really big gap in our ability to meet that fiber requirement. Now, how do we meet that fiber requirement? You can do so by eating a diverse group of fiber-rich foods like beans or quinoa or avocados. But if you're not getting these things in your diet on a consistent basis, then you're going to have a gap in your fiber intake. And that's where Supergut's products come into play. Supergut is a company that offers shakes, bars, and flavorless powder that you can add to your food that helps you boost your fiber intake. For example, their fiber mix has 8 grams of prebiotic fiber, and that prebiotic fiber, it sits in your gut, it ferments, and it feeds the good bacteria in your gut. So yeah, those are the benefits that adding fiber to your diet can have. The fiber mix, tasteless. It doesn't change the texture of your food, and it's super easy to hide into your daily routine in whatever food you're eating. They also have really, really good shakes that can serve as a meal replacement. It helps me feel full when I take them, which for many people can help lead to weight loss. I know that's an important goal for a lot of people, and there are a lot of products on the market right now that help suppress appetite. Well, fiber is nature's appetite suppressant, and you may be a candidate for getting more of this in your diet to help you with weight loss. They also have fiber bars, and if you're a snacker, the fiber bar could be great for you because it tastes delicious, but it's also packed with 10 grams of prebiotic fiber. Those are the 3 products that Supergut offers that helps people improve their gut health. They have hundreds of testimonials, thousands of people that are buying this product on a weekly basis. And I'm a supporter and a huge fan of everything that they're building. And if you want to support your gut health, highly recommend you guys check out Supergut's Fiber Mix, Supergut's Shake, or Supergut's Fiber Bars. So you may wonder, after saying all of this, right? Because remember, continuous glucose monitors were not created for diabetes. We don't know what they were created for because we live in a world where we forgot. Remember, we're still in this framework. You may be wondering, are CGMs even useful in non-diabetic populations? And there are some conflicting studies out there. There are some studies that suggest that CGM is not useful and it didn't lead to any meaningful lifestyle changes. But there are some promising studies that prove its effectiveness for those who don't have diabetes. I wish I could link them, and I'm gonna find them to put in the show notes here. But Levels is working on some groundbreaking information that proves its effectiveness in non-diabetic population. But beyond what we're showing in the studies, I have some personal anecdotes that I can share with you. My father, my dad, for example, 58 years old. You will look at him and you will think he's healthy. He looks young. He's got all of his teeth. He's walking. He's not overweight. He has energy. He looks like the model of good health. And so him being in such good health, going to the doctor as often as he should was kind of like it was optional, you know? Then he started monitoring his glucose, and he learned that his blood sugar was consistently in pre-diabetic range. Had no idea. Assumed that he was completely healthy. Turns out, again, his blood sugar was in pre-diabetic range. And after monitoring his blood sugar for a few weeks, he was able to bring his blood sugar levels back down into normal range, or right at the borderline. And it had nothing to do with the diagnosis or him knowing that he's in pre-diabetic range. That was part of it. Maybe that's like 50% of it. But the other half was him being able to see how his glucose was trending on a daily basis to make decisions that supported optimal glucose. For example, in the afternoon or the evening, if he's eating food and he notices his blood sugar spiking, then he's getting up and he's going up and down the steps, walking around the house. Getting steps or increasing your step count in general is such a good habit. But without that data to prompt you to walk, because you're trying to bring your blood sugar levels back down into normal range, what are the chances you're going to get up? It's 7:30 p.m. You just got done eating dinner. He's chilling with my mom. They're watching a movie. If you're not monitoring your blood sugar and watching your glucose rise, you're not going to be prompted to move around. So the CGM prompted that habit and so many others that led him to decrease his blood sugar. That's going to have a lasting impact on his life moving forward. I have another a student who has been pre-diabetic for the past 3 years. And after monitoring his glucose for just 2 weeks, he decreased his average blood sugar by 15 milligrams per deciliter. These are people that are not diabetic. He's been trying to reverse his prediabetes for 3 years, you guys. And after being able to see what's happening, he was able to begin reducing his blood sugar levels. And one of the key insights that he took away from his experience was that stress was contributing to his blood sugar spikes just as much as food was. He saw a 40 milligram per deciliter spike from taking his twin daughters to the doctor. That was a stressful experience for him. And so one of his takeaways from that was to begin implementing stress-reducing activities like meditation, deep breathing, taking breaks when he feels himself getting riled up to keep his blood sugar levels normal. And these revelations would not be possible without him having access to a CGM. Now, the funny thing about that is he's asked his doctor for a prescription, and his doctor said no. And he's not the only one. People are telling their doctors how much their experience with the CGM has changed their life, but their doctors are gatekeeping. Maybe because the doctors are concerned about the supply of CGM and they want to reserve it for their patients who need it most. Understandable, right? But in what world does it make sense to only prescribe your patient a CGM after he becomes diabetic? You're basically saying, hey, patient, you're pre-diabetic right now, but you don't need a CGM. I'll give you a CGM when you become diabetic. That makes no sense when you can leverage a CGM to completely reduce your chances of becoming diabetic in the first place, right? So based on those two anecdotes and several others that I don't have time to get into on this podcast, I think it serves as proof that CGM can be very useful in the non-diabetic population. Now, let's put diabetes to the side, because when it comes to CGM, it's not really just about preventing diabetes. There are seven other leading causes of death in this country that are related to blood sugar, right? Cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke, chronic lower respiratory disease, Alzheimer's, influenza, kidney disease. If you guys want more information on these, there's a blog post that Levels put out. It's called "What is the Metabolic Health Crisis?" I'll link it in the description of this video and in the show notes of the podcast. Check that out, because the research draws a very distinct link between blood sugar and each of these top leading causes of death. So people having access to this device, CGMs, that encourage behavior change for better health outcomes will reduce their risk of death to either of those other causes. So if doctors are taking into consideration that blood sugar is closely related to each of these causes of death, then why does it make sense to wait for someone to become diabetic in order for them to have access to CGM? That doesn't make sense. Now, sure, like we're all going to die one day, right? We get older, our risk of developing one of those top 10 leading causes of death naturally increases. We can't escape death. That's fine. Something's going to kill us. But what if blood sugar was not just related to death? What if it was also closely related to how we experience the world? Well, I have some news for you. It is. Instead of just considering the conditions that violently rob us of life, blood sugar control can also make life more difficult for us in very subtle ways that we're missing. Fatigue, brain fog, depression, increased appetite, which can lead to chronic overconsumption and weight gain, anxiety, chronic pain, infertility. These are all consequences of poor metabolic health, which is rooted in decisions that lead to poor glucose control. And so you stick a continuous glucose monitor on somebody's arm and you show them which decisions they're making that are leading to poor glucose control. Then you begin reducing the prevalence of fatigue, brain fog, depression, anxiety, chronic pain, infertility. You begin reducing the prevalence of each of these things in society. That's a really big deal because people are in pain and taking several medications to alleviate the symptoms of what ultimately is poor metabolic health or mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, since that's such a big deal, how much would you bet that the ramifications that I just mentioned, fatigue, brain fog, etc., how much would you bet that they're somewhere at the root of many of society's shortcomings? We're not just talking about people going to the doctor and finding out that they're sick. I'm talking about you going to the airport and getting terrible customer service because the employees there don't feel good. Because maybe they belong to, the 93% of Americans who are metabolically unhealthy. We don't take these things into consideration. We think that you're sick, you take medications, and then you show up in the world how you show up. But how you feel on a daily basis completely alters how you show up. And so, for example, my father and I, we traveled to Tampa recently. We go through the airport. And as I'm traveling through TSA, I'm interacting with each of the agents and nobody's happy. And I'm not saying that you have to be happy at work. I'm not always happy when I'm working. But nobody's happy. They're tossing bags, aggressively patting people down, dismissing people, being short with the answers that they're providing to people's questions. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing a decline in customer service. At the same time, we're seeing a decline in the health of our society, you guys. What about relationships? The difficulty of getting into a good relationship, but also the prevalence of divorce or the increasing rates of divorce. I mean, relationships are hard even when you're healthy. It must be really tough to show up for your marriage when you're experiencing something like depression and you can't put your finger on why. And then you begin taking all these other medications that have different effects on your body. What about incidents of road rage? The perpetuation and acceptance of fear, something that we saw very violently in 2020. People are afraid. How much do you want to bet that the COVID pandemic that we had was exacerbated by the already existing rates of anxiety and depression and brain fog that we were already experiencing? How we received the news and everything that was happening was directly related to the status of our health, the existing status of our health. And that's why I think it's so important for all of us to care about getting to the root of poor health and leveraging every tool that we have at our disposal, like a continuous glucose monitor. Because if you don't care about the rising rates of diabetes or, those other top 10 leading causes of death that I mentioned, maybe you care about the customer service at your favorite places that you patronize. Or maybe you really care about your relationship, your marriage, your wife or your husband who doesn't feel good or who maybe isn't the easiest to get along with sometimes. Maybe you care about your children, These are poor health, poor glucose control is manifesting in our society in ways that we're not even thinking about. But let's transition. Let's remember that you forgot everything about continuous glucose monitors being used as a tool for diabetics. I want to ask you a question. If someone came up to you and said, "Hey, I have a device that will bring more awareness to people's food choices and reinforce better decisions, thereby decreasing the prevalence of disease," wouldn't you want to do everything you can to make sure that everyone has access to this tool? I would. You would too. I'm sure those of you listening to this, you're a good human. I know the news and social media sometimes makes it seem like people are unbearable, or that humans, we're evil. If you get out of the house and you go out and you interact with people, most of us are good people trying to live a good life, right? And we all want each other to feel well and to have good lives. So, yes, there are limitations with access to continuous glucose monitors. I'm going to touch on that in a second. But without the current stigma, being that this device should only be used by diabetics, well-meaning people would want to get this in the hands of as many people as possible. And that suggests to me that the underlying problem when it comes to this debate between who should be using this, I think it's in our minds, you guys. I think it's in our culture. I think we don't see this as a tool for prevention because it's always been used as a tool for management. But if we could shift our perspective surrounding CGMs, I think it would push us to come up with solutions to make it more accessible. And that's really at the foundation of this argument between who should have access to it. Because yes, when it comes to priority, 100%, you can't argue with the fact that people who need it to survive should have access to it first. But if we don't increase the demand, then these companies who seek to profit from this aren't going to have a reason to increase the supply. And that demand will increase. I'm going to touch on that in just a second. Hey, you guys. So if you listen to this podcast often, which you should, you know how important it is to have healthy habits to pretty much enjoy a good life. There are very few things that you can get away with doing that won't eventually catch up to you. And that means good and bad things. So on the bad end of that spectrum, that means something like eating Skittles every single day, which is something that I used to do. That caught up to me, and it caused me to become pre-diabetic at some point. And it caused me to become sick a lot. I was actually sick all the time. But on the good end of that spectrum is doing something like drinking a multivitamin. Now, I'm not familiar with how familiar you are with drinking a multivitamin, but it's something that I've gotten into recently that's completely replaced my previous supplement routine, and it's something that I'm really enjoying right now. So I'm taking a powder right now called AG1 by Athletic Greens, and AG1 is comprised of 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food source ingredients that help me have more energy throughout the day. I oftentimes feel a small boost in mental clarity shortly after drinking it, which I do on an empty stomach every single morning after I make eggs. And it's one of the simplest habits that I currently have that leads to better health. Again, habits are what create who you are. And taking AG1 every single morning is something that just comes naturally to me. I wake up in the morning, and after brushing my teeth and washing my face, when I head to the kitchen with my book in my hand, I know that AG1 is my next step. And when you have strong habits like that, things that are ingrained into your day, it's so much easier to do them on a consistent basis. And that's the big thing about taking vitamins, right? Because you can do them for a week and a half. But how often do you quit because it becomes inconvenient or because you forget? Implementing AG1 into my daily routine is something that I do that I don't forget. It's a staple. And having habits like that is one of the best ways to build a foundation of good health. With that being said, if you want to take ownership of your health, today is a good time to start. Athletic Greens is offering a free year's worth supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs to go along with your first purchase. All you have to do is go to athleticgreens.com/TCHP to take advantage of that exclusive offer. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/TCHP. All right, you guys, you know this podcast is all about health, and I can't talk about good health without talking about health insurance because, let's face it, the society that we live in requires you to have a backup plan in case accidents happen. And that's a beautiful thing that we have systems in place to cover you in case of a catastrophic event or for less catastrophic events like needing to see your doctor or needing to get some medication, right? Insurance plays a huge role in our lives and our ability to take good care of ourselves, especially as we age. And that's why I want to talk to you guys about Access Benefit Consultants. Access is a sponsor of this podcast. They're also my parents' company, and they've been in the business of insuring people for over 30 years. They have clients that have been with them for a very long time that rely on them for providing them with the most accurate information about the best benefits possible. And if you're anything like me, you need access to that information too. I have 4 kids, a wife, and we're self-employed. So finding coverage for us was tricky. And at first we didn't think it was possible. But luckily we reached out to Access to Benefit consultants. They got us in touch with one of their agents and they were able to get us a quote and enroll us in the plan all in less than 24 hours. And let's face it, there's nothing more convenient about getting what you need, exactly what you need, in a short amount of time. And I'm grateful that Access Benefit Consultants provided that experience for us. And I'm confident that they'll provide that experience for you as well. So if you find yourself in need of an insurance plan, or if you want to evaluate the plan that you're currently in, I highly recommend you reach out to them. You can go to accessbenefits.com and go to their online quote tool to enroll yourself, or you can fill out the form on their website and someone from their team will reach out to you in no time. Again, that's Access Benefits, spelled like AXXESS, benefits.com, to get in touch with one of their agents to make sure that you have coverage in place for all your healthcare needs. Again, this is not to turn my back on the fact that there's a current limitation. We're not waving this off. This is very important too. And this also needs to be addressed in a way that people who really need access to CGM have it. And for the most part, I think that they do. I briefly looked into CGM shortages, and there was one jarring headline in 2020 where Abbott was taking 2 to 4 weeks to fulfill prescriptions for continuous glucose monitors. They were having a delay in 2020. Since then, and I'm 100% open to correction. So if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to this, reach out and let me know if I'm wrong. But since then, widespread shortages have been undocumented. And that leaves me with the impression that sourcing raw materials isn't an ongoing issue. And if sourcing raw materials isn't an ongoing issue for the production of CGM, I think that eventually more companies throwing their hat into this arena will improve the reliability of CGM and drop the cost of this life-saving technology. I think that regardless of which side of the aisle that you're on when it comes to the debate for who should use CGM, I think that you could be on board for that. Well, okay, there are those who stand to profit from us staying sick. They don't want that. But the fastest way to get this device from being dressed up in red tape and into the free market is to demonstrate its effectiveness in the non-diabetic population. If you're concerned about shortages now, that's fine. But the truth is, more people are going to be using CGM one way or another. Because guess what? The CGM market in the United States is expected to grow from 4.8 billion, that's a 2021 number, to 16.7 billion by 2028. And here's the kicker. That's not because diabetics are using this product. I'm sorry, this is not because non-diabetics are using this product. Excuse me. It's not because non-diabetics are using this product. This is because of the rising number of people expected to be diagnosed with diabetes. That's crazy. We're expected to multiply the CGM market by a factor of 4 over the next 5 years due to the number of people expected to be diagnosed with diabetes. Why would we not do everything we can to get ahead of this, you guys? Let's put this in context. In 2019, the total number of people between the ages 20 and 79 with diabetes was 463 million. In 2021, that number grew by 15% to 537 million. By 2030, that number is expected to increase to 643 million. And by 2045, that number is expected to increase again to 783 million. And remember, we're still looking at a spread of, 10% of these people, maximum between 10% of these people being type 1 diabetic. That means that 90 to 95% of the prevalence of type 2 diabetes over the next 15 years, or diabetes in general, not just type 2, 90 to 95% of diabetes in general over the next 22 years-ish is preventable. It's preventable. CGM is projected to increase because the population of diabetics is expected to increase. Would it not be great if we could ramp up the use of CGM now so we can get ahead of these daunting projections? I'm sorry, guys, but I really don't think we should sit by and wait until more people are diabetic for us to start meeting the demands of CGM, because we see here in trends of the market that CGM use is going to grow. Companies are going to fulfill that need because that's what humans do. We meet demands. Somebody always finds a way to do so. And there are currently some very, very smart people working on this, you guys. Apple is developing technology to be able to monitor glucose through an Apple Watch. I'm not sure how reliable that'll be, but again, this is just proof. When the demand is there and when the capital is there, people are going to meet the demand. So if we can increase demand now to solve this looming problem, because we're not just frivolously giving CGMs away, these are people that are eventually going to become diabetic. These diabetics that we're expected to live with by 2045, that's 783 million people, they already exist. They're living today. Your neighbors, your friends, the kids that your kids go to school with, they're here. They're here. Let's not wait for them to become diabetic to start meeting the demands of CGM. Let's start using CGM on a widespread basis. Let's start using this technology in non-diabetic people so we can get ahead of this horrific projection that is 783 diabetics by 2045. 783 million diabetics by 2045. But again, we're not just talking about diabetes. That's that, but there is that. But let's talk about other stuff. 93% of Americans are not metabolically healthy. That means that you don't have ideal levels of blood pressure, blood sugar, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, and waist circumference. More than 10% of people in the U.S. have diabetes, and 21% of that is undiagnosed. More than a third of U.S. adults have prediabetes. Insulin resistance affects more than 129 million Americans. 73.6% of U.S. adults are overweight or obese. Around 25% of the U.S. suffers from preventable non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And individuals meeting at least 3 criteria for metabolic syndrome have 60% higher annual healthcare costs, you guys. I'm not just saying that we should use continuous glucose monitors to prevent a diabetes epidemic or a chronic disease epidemic in general in the future. I'm saying that we need it right now. We need it right now. We need it now. Because poor health isn't just manifesting as people living with sickness and people still being able to function like normal with the help of some medication. No, sir. It's slowly chipping away at everything that makes us human. And it's affecting areas that we're not even thinking about. Poor health is evident in our school system. The teachers that are educating our children that don't feel good on a daily basis. Are our children really getting the education that they need? Maybe. Poor health is evident in our government. I'm not going to get into politics on this podcast, but I think that we could all agree that our government is not nearly as effective as they could or should be. Poor health is evident in our policing, in the workforce. It's everywhere, you guys. It's impacting every area of our lives. And it's a plague that's gotten out of control. And it's time for us to face the fact and do something about it. Now, what I'm not saying is that we can throw a CGM at these problems and everything will go away. That's not what I'm saying. But CGM is a reliable tool to bring awareness. That's an important word to remember. Awareness to the toxic environment that we're all existing in. And again, we should be throwing every resource we have to prevent us from basically becoming extinct. We're killing ourselves, you guys. And these are some of the primary contributing factors. Chronic overnutrition. That is a huge contributing factor that CGM brings awareness to. Our processed food environment is a huge contributing factor that CGM brings awareness to. Our insane sugar consumption. And this is coming from somebody who is, I be going crazy on candy sometimes. CGM brings awareness to that. The fact that we're more sedentary than ever is a huge contributing factor that CGM brings awareness to. Our poor sleep hygiene is a contributing factor that CGM brings awareness to. Our increased level of stress is a contributing factor that, again, CGM brings awareness to. If it wasn't clear to you by everything that I just said, it's all about awareness. And we're distracted because the society that we created for ourselves rewards us with illness if we're not intentional about being healthy. And if we don't have tools that bring awareness to the status of our health, then illness is the default. It's the default now. And so, again, I said this twice. I'm going to say it again for the third time. We need to be throwing every resource available we have at bringing awareness to our health habits so that we can create a society and a world that fosters good health, so that we can have an effective school system to put our children into, so that we can have an effective government that actually gets stuff done, right? So that we can have a police that aren't taking their frustration and anxiety and anger out on citizens. So that we can have effective marriages, which lead to effective communities. It's all rooted in poor health, you guys. Or not poor health. It's all rooted in health and how we feel on a daily basis. Again, CGM is not a cure. I'm not making that claim. But with the right education to go along with this technology, we can bring awareness to the habits that are making us sick and start to make a bottom-up impact on the systems that influence how we feel on a daily basis. So, in my humble opinion, I think we can kill all this back and forth about who should be using a CGM, and let's celebrate the fact that more people are using it and bringing more awareness to the core tenets of optimal metabolic health. And when it comes to the priority of who should have access to CGM, I think that smart people can figure that out. I imagine a world where we have our thumbs on CGM, the availability of CGM worldwide, and the people who need them, and we find a way to prioritize type 1 diabetics and type 2 diabetics. But beyond that, we need to find a way to get this in the hands of people who can take advantage of the awareness that this device brings to prevent them from becoming diabetic and to alleviate symptoms that they're already experiencing, like brain fog, fatigue, infertility. We can heal, you guys. We can heal as a nation, as a country, as a world. We can heal ourselves. But it starts with bringing awareness to our habits, and I am just such a huge fan of using CGM to do that. So, all in all, whatever side of this argument you fall on, I want you to know that I think that there's common ground. I think that the common ground is that we want everybody to be healthy. We want to live in a world that thrives. And I think that CGM is a tool that can help that happen. So if you have an opposing opinion, I'll welcome it, as long as it's, respectful. But bring your opposing opinion. This is a discussion that we need to have, you guys. It's a discussion that we need to be having, and I'm here for it. But my official stance is that CGM can bring awareness to the health habits that are contributing to chronic disease, the increasing prevalence of chronic disease, and the increasing prevalence of symptoms that are leading up to chronic disease, that are stripping away at the fiber of what makes us human. So adapting this technology at a large scale, I think we'll all be better because of it. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Culture of Health podcast. Make sure you guys subscribe. Check out some of our previous episodes to help you build a better foundation of health. And as always, open to your feedback here, okay? Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys on the next one.